Some of the most difficult times for students, such as myself, are midterms and finals. The pressure to perform well and get a good grade can often be very stressful. Finding ways to be more productive while also retaining information is very important to studying for tests, and with the right tools, this is very achievable. That's where music comes in. Music is the single greatest tool for learning, however when used wrong, it can actually be detrimental to learning. Essentially what I mean by this is that not just any music will work, but certain genres can actually become distracting. Now, most people know that classical music is helpful for studying, and while that is true, you actually have a lot more options than that. That being said, while there are plenty of right choices, there are also a lot of wrong choices. Today, I'd like to introduce a few of these genres that I've found can greatly benefit your studying, not only so you can pass your finals, but so that you can actually take something away from these classes. Almost everyone likes music, and that's because of the huge variety of genres. There is something for everyone in the world of music, and that's why it can also become an incredible studying tool. First, however, you need to know what to use and how to use it correctly. To make this video easier to digest, I've separated it into three main sections. First, we're going to start with reading, simply because of how commonly used it is. Then, I'm going to shift the focus to the more equation-heavy subjects like math and science. And finally, we're going to look at how music can help with your general studying habits. Without further ado, let's begin with the reading portion. Almost every subject requires reading in some capacity, from simply reading a textbook to analyzing a novel or document. No matter what you're reading, music is going to benefit you. A study performed in the Philippines on 9th and 12th graders observed how reading comprehension was affected by music. Classical and instrumental pop music in particular all showed great improvement with the students' comprehension of their assigned readings. Jazz and R&B were shown to be not as effective due to how complex the music tends to be. Everything about these genres is very complicated, so it requires a little more brain power to listen to. This leads to distraction and can ultimately hurt your reading abilities. One thing to notice here in this study is that classical music is not the only option available. As many of us know, classical is not everyone's favorite genre. In fact, I would argue that most people, understandably, aren't fans of it. This is why having alternatives is so important. While I'm on the subject of reading, I'd like to highlight a very common but inefficient method of background noise that a similar study looks at. Television, a rather common background device for students, was actually shown to hurt your reading comprehension. They wrote that the impact of music or other background audio and audiovisual stimuli may be influenced by the presence of verbal contents in those stimuli. So when you're studying, keep this in mind. Podcasts, movies, and TV shows, while entertaining, are all going to be harmful for your studying. In short, reading comprehension is going to be greatly improved by listening to instrumental music. Classical music, instrumental pop are all going to be your friend when it comes to reading. Next, I want to take a look at the more equation-heavy subjects. Math and science in particular are notorious for having repetitive and often complex problems. Physics, calculus, and statistics all fall under this category, and music will help make your study sessions with these subjects much easier. Fault Magazine has an article discussing just this. They tell us that classical music is great at increasing temporal reasoning. This skill is useful for any higher levels of math and science that require being able to conceptualize and mentally manipulate three-dimensional objects. Another study looked at worker productivity as they perform repetitive tasks. This study may not look at students, however, this still can relate to math and science because studying for these subjects requires practicing the same equations over and over and over. This study showed that, once again, instrumental pop and classical had huge effects on their efficiency. So while you're practicing math or science problems, put on some music and see what happens. Finally, let's take a look at how music can benefit your general studying habits. By this, I mean skills such as concentration and memory retention, both of which are very important. Concentration is arguably the most important part of studying, and it can be improved with music as well. Vault magazine looks at studying with music, and they recommended soft piano music to their readers. They say that students reported massive improvements in their concentration while listening to it. Now, I know that I have trouble focusing while I study, and I'm sure that most people have struggled with similar issues. And with how many distractions we have in our modern world, who can really blame you? That's why it's important, now more than ever, to tune out your distractions with music. A group of British researchers backed up the previous claim when they performed a set of MRIs on participants while they were listening to classical music and observed how it affected their brains. Their research showed that classical music activates the part of the brain involved in reward experience and movement, which is important for targeting attention. Again, the evidence shows that your focus can and will be improved with music, so why not utilize it? Another equally essential part to studying is memory retention. You can be incredibly focused, but that doesn't really matter if you don't retain the information you're learning. A writer for USC Today wrote that with classical music, students are put in a heightened emotional state, making them more receptive to information. With how many exams you end up studying for around finals, memory retention is super important. You end up getting a lot of information thrown at you, and it can be hard to remember everything, so why not make it a little easier on yourself? Ultimately, we can see that your general studying habits can be greatly improved by listening to music. If I haven't mentioned it enough, I think it's important to emphasize one more time. Classical music is not the only option. I believe it to be the best option, however, it's not the only one for you, and for people who don't like classical music, that's very important. I haven't directly touched on it, but if you didn't catch it, all of this music has one thing in common. It never has lyrics. That's honestly it. And while there are other factors that go into it, that's the really big one. This leads me into the main takeaway of this. Lyrics are your worst enemy. Now, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but what I mean is that lyrics are the factor that causes certain genres to be detrimental to your studying. I've mentioned it over and over, so I hope by now that you understand how important that is. A researcher told us earlier that any verbal stimulus is going to detract from studying. Vault magazine says the exact same thing, saying that it will decrease productivity and focus. Your brain is going to recognize words being spoken, and it will immediately lose all focus, even if you don't necessarily notice it. This means that you don't need classical music to improve studying. Now, this isn't a one-size-fits-all scenario, but take your favorite movie, for example, your TV show, a video game. Even instrumental pop music has been mentioned. I don't care what it is, just play whatever works for you, and because it's familiar to you, it will keep your mind from wandering, and it will improve your studying. As I've shown, music is the single greatest tool for learning, so while you're studying for your exams, remember that it doesn't have to be so exhausting, and you don't have to listen to boring music. You can be productive, efficient, and actually take something away from these classes while listening to music. Thank you.